Welcome to the Queen's Bench podcast. Today, we're joined by Professor Michael Pratt, an associate professor of law at Queen's University with a rich academic background from institutions like the University of Toronto and the University of Sydney. A seasoned educator, Professor Pratt specializes in private law, with significant contributions to contract law and real estate transactions. His recent book on land agreements in Canada and a myriad of insightful publications speak volumes of his expertise. Let's delve into a fascinating conversation with Professor Pratt.
Before we jump in, please be sure to check out our website at queensbench.ca and follow us on all of your favorite social media and audio platforms. Now let's get started.
Thanks for joining.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into law?
So that's a circuitous route. It's a bunch of rabbit holes that got me here, really.
Okay.
I started out in my undergrad was in math and physics, and then I finished my undergrad and traveled. So and during my travels, I sort of it was in and around the time of the Meech Lake debates and then the Charlottetown Accord. These are historical things now to you guys, but, constitutional upheaval in the country. And I became interested in federalism and the state of the Canadian Constitution. And that was at least part of the reason why I decided to go to law school.
Okay.
Prior to that, were you orienting yourself towards physics or engineering primarily? Like coming out of high school, what did you think you wanted to do?
I didn't know what I wanted to do exactly. I'd wanted to be, since I was a kid, I'd had a vague notion that I wanted to get a PhD.
Okay.
I'd heard that there was this thing called a PhD, and I had this naive idea that's hilarious to me now, that somebody with a PhD in field X knows everything there is to know about field X. And so I decided that this is what I was, a curious kid. I loved to learn stuff. And I was particularly fond of, it sounds a little bit like you, Muk, taking stuff apart and lots of work with electronics. And I was a ham radio operator. I don't know if that means anything to anybody.
I've thought about doing that myself.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I think it's a hobby that's very different now than it was because communication is so easy by other means.
Yeah.
But back in the day, it was a big effort to you had to get your license and study for exams and learn about electronics and radios, and I did all that. And in fact, I think I don't know if the record is still there, but I was the youngest person in Canada to get my amateur license.
Wow.
And so, you're conversing with people through Morse code and building your own antennas and radios and things. And so I thought, the combination of those two things, I thought I'd do graduate work in electronics or electrical engineering or something, electronics engineering. So that was my original design.
Was that interest spurred by your parents at all, or like was their background related at all to engineering, or
not at all?
Okay.
No, my dad is a retired lawyer.
Oh, okay.
My mom has worked in various capacities. She worked in HR for the City of Toronto and the Toronto Zoo. No technical or scientific aptitude at all, in fact.
Yeah.
The apple fell far from the tree here. And so I had a vague idea that I wanted to A, get a PhD, and B, pursue electronics. And so the physics and math route made some sense.
Okay.
But then I left undergrad, and for whatever reason, and if in my most honest moments, I'm not entirely sure I would do it the same again. I left physics and decided to try law school. And
wow.
But I had it in mind right from the get-go that I was going to teach law. So because I was going to get this damn PhD.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what do you do with a PhD except teach?
Yeah.
So right from the get-go of what was then an LLB that you call a JD now, I was destined, or I wanted to go on and do graduate work and eventually get a PhD and then teach law.
Okay.
Seemed like a good field for all sorts of reasons. I was interested in the constitutional aspect of things, but also, law schools had money and they were hiring, and unlike today, it was easier to get a job back then, and intellectually, it's a fascinating area, and or discipline. So I pursued it, and here I am. I never went to law school to practice law, oddly enough.
Did you fall in love with law school when you were there? The student experience, not as an academic later on, but as a student, did you love law school?
I loved law.
Okay.
I loved law from early on. I loved the study of law. I still do, with passion. It's just I think it's just a fascinating, engaging discipline. So I fell in love with the law and the study of law almost from day one there.
Muk and I both come from science backgrounds, and what I found personally was that there were way fewer opportunities to engage interpersonally in science than there are in the law school. There's ample opportunity to do group projects here. Was that a part of it at all for you? Like, did you notice that coming from physics, where I imagine you were just grinding hours on end on your own?
Yeah.
That at law school you got to engage more with peers about subject matter which you found more interesting, or?
So I think that's true, but truth is I'm a rather solitary soul. I'm very introverted, and I like my own company. So I spent a lot of time on my own studying law as opposed to studying physics. So although the social interactions and the conversation was a plus, it wasn't a big draw for me.
Did you think the academic rigor that you developed doing physics translated well to law?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So in my experience, students coming from science often feel a little bit like fish out of water when they arrive at law school, because if for no other reason, they haven't read more than 5 pages at a time in any one sitting.
That's a big thing.
Or written anything, any prose of any length. But I actually think they're extremely well suited for the study of law because of the rigor that you're taught in your science studies, and the same with philosophy degrees.
Yeah,
people coming to law from philosophy or from the sciences have that appreciation for the importance of precision in expression. They understand the idea of logic, and they understand the idea of logical reasoning, whether it's inductive or deductive, and the care that it requires, and the rigor, the bonus and the kind of power of the rigor of logical reasoning and good conceptual analysis. All of that is the stuff of science and philosophy training.
Yeah.
So
the writing too is did you have to do any writing in physics, or probably not at all almost?
Well, not in physics per se. No, I don't think in any of the physics courses you wrote, as far as I can recall, you wrote essays.
Yeah. So you had little exposure to writing in your undergrad then?
I took some philosophy courses in my undergrad.
I
think I've got writing. I've always enjoyed writing, and I think I have a capacity for writing, and I have since I was a kid. I think it may be somewhat genetic or something. My parents are both excellent writers. My sister is a professional writer, so I think it's somewhere in my blood.
I had the same experience. I took first year European history when I was at Western.
Right.
I thought it would be like it'll be cool to learn a little bit about history. I walk in and it's a required course for international relations, poli-sci, history, those disciplines. And they're looking at me like, you're in med-sci. At the time I was in med-sci. They're like, you're in medical science. What are you doing here? You should drop this course. It's a full year credit with an essay component, which is like 3 essays. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to stick around. I like this. I ended up doing very well. So I think like, even though, there's a big divide between being in the arts and humanities disciplines and being in the pure sciences. But I think some people kind of are on the edge where they're just interested and curious. And it's kind of nice in our education system to be able to take an elective course and see the other side and kind of get a little bit of that skill. under your belt. Because I think like to this day in law school, the reason why I'm a decent writer, half decent writer, is because of those kinds of experiences, not the sciences.
Not the sciences per se.
Yeah.
Were you a big reader and writer prior to university? Like, is that?
Yeah, but for me, reading has never been an enjoyable
Yeah.
like activity in and of itself. It's always to an end. So I hardly read fiction. To this day, I only read nonfiction, really. And it's because I want to learn, which is what the enjoyable aspect of it is. But I don't like the act of reading.
Right.
So like if you give me an opportunity to watch a video or a documentary, I'll take that over reading any day of the week.
Yeah.
How about yourself?
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't read fiction almost at all anymore. It's all nonfiction.
Yeah. Do you ever have you ever tried audiobooks or anything like that?
I used to listen to a lot of audiobooks. Now it's been supplanted by podcasts.
Yeah. I listen to a lot.
There's just so many podcasts out there that are excellent.
Plus one.
Plus one now. Yeah.
Do you still engage at all with physics? I'll move on, but I find it interesting because it's so different. Even though it obviously offers some benefits to law, but do you still engage at all with math and physics, or
just as a layperson now? And I sometimes find I have, as you could probably tell, like I have I don't, it's not a regret, but I do wonder if my younger self made the right decision in leaving physics, because there's such beauty in that, in the study of physics. I always just loved it. It was just so, I was so passionate about it. And the reasons I didn't pursue it were several, but, and so now I follow it, just in the sense that I listen to, people like Sean Carroll, who's a theoretical physicist, Johns Hopkins, who has a podcast, that's excellent.
That's awesome.
He speaks to lots of physicists. And
there's a niche but growing category. There's Neil deGrasse Tyson, Michio Kaku, a few others that I've encountered.
I think there's something about physics and understanding the fundamentals of reality and what we've discovered about the curious, weird truth about our universe,
which is crazier than fiction.
Which is crazier than fiction. In fact, one of Carroll's books, I think, is called "Preposterous Universe." a wonderful phrase. So I think we have something innate in us that wants to know and is curious about these things.
Yeah, and I think sounds like you also appreciated the black and whiteness of it. Like there are no appeal court decisions that you don't like in physics.
This is the thing. There's physics is in a way it's really easy. Put me in social sciences or in a discipline like law where there's just gray.
It's all gray.
There's rarely an absolutely right answer, and it can be extraordinarily frustrating to a science-minded person. I make a lot of my effort and scholarship in law is a kind of maybe a wrong-headed attempt to create something scientifically rigorous out of the unscientific material of law. So as you know from being in my class in contracts, I do tend to try to find the basic principles of a given area like contract law and teach and understand an area. And I try to find the sort of atomic units or basic fundamental principles in a given area and try to teach my students to understand an area from those basic fundamentals. So everything, or a great deal of the law of contract, can be derived from certain fundamental rules. And so that's a very scientific way of approaching a discipline like law. But it works to a large extent. You're never going to get the kind of rigor you get in science, but you can avoid the temptation of law students that I find very frustrating, and I try to disabuse them of it right away, which is it's not memorizing. If you're engaging in a course by trying to memorize a bunch of ratios or rules or principles, you're not going to do as well as you could, and you're not going to be thinking like a lawyer. You should be understanding the rudiments, the purposes, the functions of a given area of law, and from those basic functions and rules and purposes, you should be able to derive 10 times more than those. and so, don't memorize the rule in Folks and Beer, or, the principle that, payment of a lesser sum in exchange for the release of a larger debt isn't binding. You can remember that rule if you wish.
Yeah.
But it's not going to help much. It doesn't represent a true understanding, because that rule is just a derivation of the principle of consideration. It's just that fundamental idea of contract law, that contract is an exchange of things of value. From that principle, you can derive Folks and Beer.
Yeah.
And so I try to instill in my students a sense that understanding an area of law isn't just memory work. There's some memory work, but I have a terrible memory. And as you said, I think in your first podcast, you're going to forget the cases.
Yeah.
You're going to forget them as soon as you finished your exam in most cases.
Yeah. Most of them. Some stand out.
Some are going to stand out for sure, and they'll be with you forever. But the bulk of them, I suggest to you, will after a couple of years just fade into memory.
Yeah.
But what you'll have is the rudiments, the fundamentals of the area in question, and you'll be able to work through a problem in contract or property or tort or whatever without necessarily remembering exactly the cases that you learned in first year.
Okay. Yeah. So you do your undergrad in physics, you get your law degree, you enjoy that. Are you thinking about employment at this point? Like, you mentioned you didn't want to be a practitioner of law, but did any thought of working immediately after the conclusion of your law degree, come across your mind? Or
well, I wanted to teach law.
Okay.
So I wanted to be a law professor.
Okay.
And that desire congealed and crystallized in first year.
Okay.
The beauty of law school was, if I didn't get a law teaching job, I could always be a lawyer.
Yeah.
And really, that wasn't such a bad idea. And
it's a great fallback.
It's a great fallback. And I still, I do a little bit of consulting, and I admire good practitioners of law a great deal. And I saw my dad, as I was growing up, practicing law, and it wasn't at all a bad fallback. But I really wanted to teach something. And so I was in law school, so I'll teach law. And so I spent my law school years trying to get the best grades I could, and trying to put together some writing samples, and all the while knowing I was going to end up doing a master's and then a doctorate at some point.
So take us to Australia, where you do philosophy. How do you sort of shift from one field to another? And arguably as interesting, why Australia?
Right. So my path to philosophy was really through law. So I there's a longer and shorter version. Let me give you somewhere in between. During my law school, in law school, I was interested still in federalism and the Constitution, which is part of what drew me there. And so I did a lot of courses in constitutional law and federalism, and then for reasons that are kind of lost in the mists of history right now, I became interested in aspects of political theory in and around federalism. So I was interested in comparative federalism, Australian, Canadian federalism comparisons, and with the very idea of a federal compact, as it's sometimes called, which is a kind of contract amongst the federal party, the federal entities.
Okay.
And that led me, in turn, to the study of the social contract. The political theory and political philosophy idea of the social contract. Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Kant, and those folks. And that's where I focused my energies in some of my independent research projects at Osgoode. And then at U of T, when I was doing my Master of Laws, my LLM, I honed in on the social contract through the lens of looking at a Canadian philosopher named George Grant. And I wrote my LLM thesis on George Grant, who was critical of social contract ideas. All right. if you're with me so far, then in the study of the social contract, which is this notion of a kind of political authority is based on the assent of those obliged, of the citizenry, I became interested in the normative power of consent. So what is it to say somebody is bound because they've consented to another's rules or authority? And what is it to make a promise and be bound by it? And so that then opened up a literature. I'm a little bit like you, Muk, in the conversation before the pod we started to record. You were telling us about your passion for various somewhat esoteric hobbies, and that lead you down these rabbit holes, and you come hell or high water, you're going to understand something and follow it to its logical conclusion and understand everything there is to know about
electroplating.
No,
the tumbler. Okay, yeah. It's that tool to clean bolts and other rusty items, usually from a car, but other things.
Which is the subject of another podcast.
Yeah. Next episode, stay tuned.
So similar to you, I then opened up this hatch in about the philosophy of promising. I wanted to know everything there was to know about what moral philosophers and philosophers of language had to say about this weird idea of making a promise and being bound by it.
Yeah.
And so that was driven initially by my interest in federalism, oddly enough. And then I dived into that hole, and it's a massive literature on promising, as it turns out. And it spans moral philosophy, political philosophy, philosophy of language, and legal philosophy. And so into it I went. And initially I started my PhD at the University of Toronto in law, looking at the obligation of promises with a view to eventually turning it back to law and looking at the obligation of promises in law. Mm-hmm. But it became very clear that what I was interested in, or what I needed to get under my belt, was the philosophical literature. And so I was moving to Australia because I got a job there.
Okay.
So I applied for a job at the University of Queensland in Brisbane in late 1996 or early 1997. I applied for it. And they flew me down, which would have been good enough. I didn't care if I got the job. They flew me down for an interview. And never forget that. It was so cool. Like, just a young guy. They fly me down to Brisbane. They put me up in this lovely hotel and had this amazing steak dinner. It was all paid for.
Can I ask how old you are at this point?
Oh, you can ask, but I can't remember. So 1997, I would have been like 30.
Okay.
And okay, so I have the interview, and then I come back home, and late one night, because apparently they don't understand the time difference, it was like 2:30 in the morning. I got a call from they call them the head of school there, not the dean, giving me, offering me the job. So off I went to do my, have my first teaching gig at the University of Queensland, having finished my master's and only just started a PhD at U of T in law.
Okay.
I get to Australia, I settle in Brisbane, and then it becomes pretty clear that I really need to be in a philosophy department, because the stuff I'm reading is all philosophy. And so since I was already so far from Toronto at that point, I just switched and I enrolled in a PhD in philosophy.
So you were teaching and studying at the same time?
Yes. And so the PhD took a long time.
So were you teaching law?
I was teaching law at UQ, at the University of Queensland. Yeah.
So because you were going anyways, were you half ready to establish yourself there?
Going anyways where?
To Australia. You were going to go to work there.
Oh, yes. I was. So, I went down, my then wife and I moved to Australia in 97. I don't think we were certain whether I would
You
stay.
Always thought you'd come back, or?
I don't know. I think it was up in the air to see how it went. We stayed 3 years. We had a child down there, our first, child, our daughter Charlotte was born in Brisbane, and then it became clear, just how far it is from everything, from family.
Yeah. That's what I tell people when they say they want to move down there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lovely, I loved Australia. I loved the University of Queensland.
It seems beautiful. Yeah.
It's beautiful. The people are funny and laid back, and I just had such a great time there. But to have parents and aunts and uncles and whatever come out and visit, it was it's prohibitive.
Back then, was it hard to get stuff there? Like niche products, your hobbies, that kind of stuff?
I don't remember that being an issue. No,
Okay.
we're only talking 1997. Dark ages.
When was the Industrial Revolution?
I guess it was before Amazon.
I just assumed things would be more expensive to ship when it's that far. But I guess when you're sending container ships, it doesn't.
Yeah, all
7 instead of 1 day shipping.
Can't overnight anything from the US. I can probably guarantee you that.
I always assumed it must be a compelling place to live because I have a cousin who went down there for what was supposed to be a short time and never came home.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that happens a lot.
Yeah.
It does happen a lot with Australia.
Friends have done that of mine.
Yeah.
Others are considering it as we speak. It's an attractive place to live. The weather's
or people go
better.
down there and then they come back with a partner.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the weather was amazing. I mean, it was a bit hot and humid, but I could live hot and humid all the time.
Everything that crawls trying to kill you?
Yeah, there's that too. The cockroaches were they'd fly through the windows. I didn't know that in Queensland, they'd bat you in the head. It was like a baseball hitting you in the head. We went and got screens made we lived in this house that they called them Queenslanders because they were kind of up on stilts to get air movement around it because it was so hot. And we had somebody make us screens, even though it was sort of acultural. Nobody had screens in their windows. But these cockroaches would come through and bat you in the head, and it was horrific.
The snakes too.
The snakes, yeah.
Unbelievable. You
pros and cons, eh?
Well, you hear the horror stories. They end up in your house.
Yeah, they have everything. They have alligators, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, saltwater crocodiles.
Yeah, crocodiles.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun, and the people were great and funny, and like a kind of emblematic of Queensland laid back life is when I got into my first classroom. The very first day I taught a course at UQ, I was teaching Australian labor law, which is a story in itself. I still cannot believe that that's the first course I ever taught, Australian labor law. But there I was, nervous, my first class ever anywhere. Well, in a law school. And I got a question about 2/3 of the way through the class. Finally, somebody put up their hand. Honest to God. The very first question I ever got from a student anywhere, this guy puts up his hand. I say, okay, what is it? How much can you bench?
I had the exact same first thought. I won't lie.
Really?
I did. Yeah, I would never have asked, but I did. So we'll get there later. But
you must have been a pretty buff guy back then.
I was. Yeah. Then I was more fit than I am now. Probably 50 pounds less heavy. And
my first thought when I sat in your contracts class was, surely this man has seen pumping iron. And I don't know if it changed your life as much as it did mine, but I was like, we might have something in common here. But yeah, no, I did have the first, actually it wasn't even, it was shared by a group of us. So it might be more people than you think.
I was not in on the secret.
Did you answer the question?
I tried, I was nonplussed. I was completely taken aback by the question.
Okay. It's a nice layup though. It eases you into it for sure.
It didn't though. It was disarming. It was like, how the hell am I going to, I was nervous about answering some substantive question on Australian labor law that I wouldn't be able to answer.
Yeah.
So I wish I'd just not missed a beat and said, 320 or something, whatever the number was. Yeah. But I don't think I answered it. I think I flummoxed my way through.
It's so fast.
None of your business.
Yeah.
So did you find that you were incorporating a lot of Canadian common law into your Australian classes? And I imagine it sort of fits well, but did they ever, if that was the case, did they ever sort of wonder why you weren't focusing more on Australian cases?
No.
Or were you pretty up to speed with the Australian common law by that point?
Well, I had to be, right?
Okay.
I mean, it was, so especially in labor law, which shares very little in common with Canadian labor law. In fact, it has a different title down there. I was asked, I remember this conversation at 2:30 in the morning with the head of school from UQ, and he says, "We'd like to hire you." I said, "Great." he said, how do you feel about teaching? How do you feel about teaching industrial law? That's what he asked me. And I was, what? I pictured big machines.
Let me get back to you on that.
I've never heard that.
What's the law governing machine? So I looked it up, and it turns out to be their name for labor law, or at least in the day it was.
Okay.
So yeah, that I had to be up to speed on the Australian law. Now, contract law, which I was also asked to teach, thank goodness. Australian contract law and Canadian contract law, very, very similar. Oh. So I just plugged in Australian cases, but the law is almost identical.
Yeah, so you just go for the rule and then find which case. Okay.
Yeah, find the right case. I did put some Canadian cases in there because there are some good Canadian cases.
Did they give you a good amount of time to prepare for Australia, or was it a pretty quick turnaround from Toronto?
So no, it was pretty quick. I think I had like 3 months to pack up and move and get ready to teach after I'd been hired. And so that was a long...
So you must have been a pretty avid reader. Well, by that point, at least.
I remember going up to my then wife's parents' cottage, and I think I spent a week or 10 days during that period with a pile of Australian law books. Yeah, mainly labor law or industrial law.
Well, you have to at that point.
And I just read them all day long, every day. And
even at that though, your first run through, you still must have been terrified to teach about something you had basically just been introduced to yourself.
Yeah, the labor law was tricky. I'm not quite sure why I said yes, other than, oh my God, you're giving me a job. I'll do whatever you need.
Have you left industrial law in the past, or do you still stay current with it?
Oh no, I left it. I left it in my dust.
Yes. It's interesting though, because you go from Canada to Australia to teach. What's the biggest differences that you noticed, like almost immediately when you started teaching there?
So I think at a broad level, one thing that struck me very much about the Australian legal education system, at least in the 90s and early aughts, and I don't know if it's still the same, I think it probably is it's a heavily black letter focus. So they are very doctrinal in their approach. They had very little time, at least at the University of Queensland in the day that I was there, at the time I was there, for theoretical approaches. So, even legal philosophy wasn't particularly, I don't think people admired that field that much, put it that way. And the approach to every area of law was rather scientific, rather black letter. So there would be very few courses on offer with the title law and, there would be no law and sexuality or law and gender or anything like that, or law and philosophy, none of that.
Okay.
It was, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, how about their course? Did you find that the courts mirrored that, where they were more like text of the law and not proposive, not?
To a less so than I'm describing their education system. The Australian courts, in my experience, were excellent. The Australian High Court, the High Court of Australia, is just a superb group of jurists. I don't know if I rank my favorite courts in the world. I think the English Court of Appeal comes out on top, and then the High Court of Australia is a close second, followed by the House of Lords and the Supreme Court in the UK.
Do you still have colleagues in Australia who you have any relationship with, or?
Yeah, less. The ties have sort of faded over the years.
Naturally,
yeah. I do keep in touch with a couple of people down there. But again, it's just so far, and I haven't been down in years.
Would you ever go back?
I would love to go back and visit or give a talk.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of finding the time, because you really need like 2 weeks to make
at least,
especially with the jet lag.
With the jet lag.
Yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah.
How so how did you make your way back to Toronto after the 3-year stint?
Via Edmonton.
Okay.
So we decided, Suzanne and I, my then wife, wanted to come back. And so I started to make applications to, put in applications to teach in Canada. And the first place I got hired was at the University of Alberta. In fact, I had an offer simultaneously at Dalhousie, but I decided on Edmonton and I spent 2 years there, which were excellent. I loved U of A. I loved Edmonton.
Okay.
Maybe because I didn't expect anything of it.
Yeah.
And there were no jobs in Ontario at the time. So that was just the first step. And then I stayed a couple of years and then got the job at Queen's, and here I've been ever since.
Yeah. Do you travel throughout Canada still, like with work, or do you find you're pretty localized now?
I go to conferences at various places, but Kingston is home, and I spend most of my time here.
You referenced the consulting. Tell us a little bit about sort of the opportunities outside of academia that you, I mean, if you can give specifics, great, but just generally what opportunities there are for professors outside of teaching and research.
It's really varied and depends on the discipline and the prof. So I have colleagues, other profs who practice. They will engage in, they'll take cases and they litigate, and then lots of us, even if we don't litigate, we will do consulting work. So it could be a lawyer in a firm, or a firm getting in touch saying, we've got this case and we need some expertise, we need some advice or a strategy, some assistance with a strategy. Here's the problem. Can you help us with it? So I've done some of that, which is delightful work. I wish I had more of it. It's not something you can sort of go out and get. You get known in the field, and then people get in touch with you, I think is mainly the thing. Some of my colleagues, work as arbitrators. That's another possibility. Doing, lots of people do, they contribute to government commissions and law reform agencies and things like that.
So you've had a very adventurous, very successful career. Nobody gets
It's not over yet.
Well, no, to this point.
Right.
Are there mentors like along the way who you credit with a lot of your success? And obviously you switch between 3 relatively different areas of study.
Yeah.
In each one, did you have like a mentor or a role model even? Or did you find, like you said, you sort of just stuck to the books on your own and pursued natural interests of yours?
I think more the latter, Alex. I had some people at each stage that helped me along the way and guided me. But I don't really think, and I feel kind of unfortunate in this regard. I don't feel like I had any real true mentors coming up, as it were. Yeah. I have more people who I'd call mentors today than I did back then. Certainly at Osgood, I think in some ways I'm not even sure I'd have gotten my first teaching job if it wasn't for the help of a couple of professors, and one in particular, Bruce Ryder, who's a constitutional law and torts law professor. I've lost touch with Bruce over the years, but boy, he was supportive of my pursuit of academe back then, and that just made a world of difference to have somebody who I admired so much in my corner.
I'm just wondering, you did mention that for somebody wanting to pursue a career in teaching and academia, you said that earlier, like when you were pursuing it, it was easier and there were more jobs, more funding, etc. For somebody like in our class or our generation, would you say that it's much more difficult? And what are some ideas and approaches that one can take to make it easier and set themselves up for success if that's what they want? Yeah,
good question. I don't know that I would say it's actually harder today than it was back then. In some ways it is, at least in the following way. You're not going to really get much of a look today by a law school if you don't have at least under your belt the first couple of years of a PhD, and ideally having finished your PhD or your doctorate, like whatever, if it's an SJD or a JSD or a PhD or whatever they're called, they go by different names, or a DPhil. Whereas back when I was hired, and you'll notice colleagues here and at other law schools, some of them have LLMs, but no doctorate.
Yeah.
That's kind of not really a plausible alternative anymore. So you really do have to pursue the PhD. The doctorate. Yeah. In terms of setting yourself up, it's as simple and as hard as doing very well in law school, right? Getting the best possible grades you can and developing an interest in a particular area of law that you want to specialize in. And that doesn't mean right away. It doesn't even mean, it really doesn't even mean by the end of your JD, but certainly by the time you start your master's, you have to have decided on an area that you want to dig into deeply, and learn everything there is to learn about, and have that kind of drive and passion, that you have for tumblers, for a given area of law.
Would you encourage someone wanting to pursue academia to align with a mentor, someone in the profession already, or do you think it's yes. Sort of a...
So not necessarily aligning with a mentor. I mean, I think this is good general advice for students, is get to know a professor or two quite well, if you can. Somebody whose class maybe you enjoyed, or you can pretend that you enjoyed, and approach them and get to know them a bit by asking them questions during their office hours or whatever.
Yeah.
And show that you've got an interest in the field, and maybe ask them a bit about their work. And so they know you from Adam, as it were, and are willing, for example, to write you a reference letter when you need one, and reference letters by professors who know you a bit more than just your transcript and your CV, are gold. So that's not just for pursuing academe, but also pursuing a practice career.
Yeah.
But I think maybe particularly in academe, having an academic, a professor, being able to vouch for you and your interest and passion for a subject is valuable.
I think even if you go outside of law later down the line, having people that are in prestigious and competent positions say that you know your stuff and you're a good person and you're trustworthy is just like transferable across the board, I would say.
So don't be shy about getting to know people.
And that's what we tried to say in the earlier podcast is like, don't be shy. Do not be afraid. Most professors are wonderful human beings. You don't get there by accident. We have good institutions that select for these things, right? And so like, you're just doing yourself a disservice if you think you're not good enough to have a conversation. Like, I mean, you probably know a lot more than you think you do because you've done at least a few months of law school. You can at least have somewhat of an educated discussion on a topic. So
you don't have to come into the professor's office purporting to be an expert in the area or knowing lots. You can be asking questions. You don't know lots. You're a student.
Yeah.
You're there to learn. And so if you show an interest in what the professor is studying, for example, or want to dig a bit deeper into a case that he or she or they talked about that day, then show up in the office and talk about it, or write them an email that shows that you've thought about something. I can't tell you how much I'm sure I'm going to get 55 emails after this, but how what's the word? Kind of effective or impactful it is to get a carefully drafted, thoughtful email from a student who says, in class today you said X. I've been thinking about it. First of all, that's like, oh my God.
Well, it's more than one occasion last year in contracts that you shared those emails with the class even.
Yeah.
I'll sometimes put them up, or I'll forward them around. That's right.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about what you said. Is just like, those are golden words to the professor. Really? Okay. So my life is not a waste after all.
Oh, no. We thought about what you said all the time.
It's all I thought about.
Yeah, definitely. I think our first year contracts taught by you is very arduous. It's very theoretical. But I think if you survive and you put in your best work, I think it sets everything up for success, because you see contract law show up in practice. You see it in other courses. We saw it in property too. Yeah. And if you don't know the basic principles well enough, you just get lost. Yeah. And so I was so grateful when I was at my firm for how consistently arduous your class was, even though at the time I was like, can we just get the rule? But But the fact
you and
that
everybody else,
but
in
the
that
fact
particular year,
that the analysis was a big part of the class, and that you would point out inaccuracies and inconsistencies and try to reconcile cases. Like at the time, we had a lot of other work to do, so it was a little bit of a lot at the time.
right?
But when I was in practice, it was like I understand exactly what we're after here, the principle, the basic idea here, and this decision or this case is not going to win on this principle, even though on its face you can pull a case from 1930 that says that it's on all fours,
Right.
But it's not the right approach. It's not the right idea here, and I think I've heard from people at work too that Queen's grads, especially those taught by you, have that up their sleeve.
Well, that is very kind of you to say.
Yeah,
and
no,
I
it's
didn't
genuine.
pay him anything for this. Thanks, Muk. That's very meaningful. And yeah, I mean, because you really just expressed in through what you've just said, kind of my approach to legal education.
Yeah,
which is, the bar is high. I try to be challenging because the law is challenging. To understand it well is challenging. But there's a payoff. There's a big payoff.
Yeah.
Speak a little bit to the most gratifying and challenging parts about being a professor.
Oh, it's students like you guys, honestly. The biggest, okay, so starting, that is the rewards, not the challenges.
Yeah, I was going to say, Alex, you troublemaker.
So we've got challenges and we've got rewards. The challenges are many. I find teaching hard, and you're thrown into it. Professors, by and large, we don't have any training in teaching.
Yeah.
We're experts in a field.
Yeah.
And then we're told to come and teach industrial law.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to, I didn't go to teachers college or anything like it.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of assumption, which I don't think always holds, that being expert in an area translates in being able to convey clearly what the area says and what the contents of that area are.
Yeah.
So it's a learning curve. To some, I think it comes more naturally than to others. To me, it's not the part I find most rewarding about teaching is also part of what perhaps makes me an effective teacher to the extent I am, and that is a passion. So I love the stuff I'm teaching. I love, pick me an area of law and ask me to teach it. I'll learn it.
Yeah.
And I'll teach it, and it'll be interesting. It's just, there's so much of interest out there. And I try to convey that to my students. It's just how, interested I am in the cases we're studying. I'm not just up here because I'm getting paid to. I do it for free. Don't tell my dean, except during the exam time. Then I'll need payment. But so passion for the material, which I think is contagious.
Yeah.
But it's challenging too. It's challenging to reach everybody in that class. So if I've got 70 people in the class, they've all got different backgrounds and different learning styles, and I have to somehow reach as many of them as I can, as effectively as I can, and that's not always easy.
Yeah.
And one's approach it tends to attract or appeal to certain minds and not so much to others, which is fine. And that's just the way it is. And then you choose the professors that you're going to take courses with in future years or in future semesters.
Public speaking is obviously a huge part of teaching. Is it something you were always comfortable with, or is it something
I hated it. No, and I still, I mean, if I'm well prepared, I can do a toast or something. But,
speech.
But I'm not I wouldn't say I'm a good public speaker, per se. I don't see myself as giving a speech. It's just, I'm trying to convey something that I love thinking about and trying to, and trying to capture it as clearly as I can, and get students to, get the lights to light up in the students' faces.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most rewarding things. It's hard to convey how it feels, but for me anyway, when you're in front of a class and you're trying to explain a case or a concept that is challenging, and that probably most students haven't fully got their head around from just the reading. And then you start to see the eyes. There's a change in the eyes. There's a change in body posture when people start to get it. And there's a sense in the room, even if it's not spoken, that there's an understanding happening here. Mm-hmm. And boy, that's powerful. And then when the questions start that indicate that they've got part of it, but maybe not all of it, but they're interested in following it up. It's extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The point you made about how willing and eager profs are to engage with students. It's part of why I was so happy to see you come in with the Queen shirt on, the Queen's merch. I'm a huge advocate for the culture at Queen's in particular. We're obviously very familiar with it from the student side. Yeah. Would you say it's similar among the staff, the faculty of Queen's?
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a shill for Queen's or anything, but boy, it really is. Like, I've been at a couple of other law schools, and I've visited at more than that. And I've never been at a place I've felt more supported.
Yeah.
By colleagues.
Yeah.
So the student atmosphere of mutual support really, it's also there at the faculty level. There's differences, and we have political opinions, and there's some political divisions, I suppose, but they don't interfere with collegiality. And I've got friends and mentors on faculty who are closer in a way than any other faculty members I've ever associated with. It's just a wonderfully supportive place to be.
Yeah. That's wonderful to hear, because I think that also is like a feedback loop where if you have that in the faculty, then that's encouraged on the student side.
I think so, yeah. And that's a good point, Muk. So I feel it in the classroom.
Yeah.
I feel it in my first year classes in particular. When the students are together and before the class starts, at the very beginning of the year, it's very quiet.
Yeah.
And then it starts to get louder and louder and louder. And sort of by, I don't know, November, it's kind of deafening at the beginning of a class, which is just delightful. Like, these people, they're all getting along. They all know each other, and they're supporting each other. And so that feeds back.
I look very fondly back on the pictures maybe 50 years ago of law schools where you see these pictures of students sitting on the desks, engaging. They're so engaged with each other and the professor that you're almost building on ideas as you go.
Yeah.
And it's arguably one of the downsides of everyone having a computer that they need to type as fast as they can on.
Yeah.
It sort of eliminates that. But you're absolutely right. As the year goes on, the classes are bustling.
Yeah.
Which is super exciting. It makes going to class a lot more fun.
Yeah. And so let me stop you there, because that computer that you have in front of you that you're typing as fast as you can on, was it one of you in the very first episode that I listened to, mentioned that, you started out typing or taking, trying to take verbatim notes of what the prof was saying. And you kind of wised up that maybe that wasn't the best way to go about it, or at least you're upper your.
I've never been a good note taker.
Right.
Like, even at work, I told people, like, listen, you're going to bring me to an examination. I'm going to do my best. I did pretty good notes for that kind of stuff, but like, I was killing myself.
Yeah.
I like being present in the room. Active listening. I like asking questions. I ask too many questions. You had to cut me off a couple of times.
Who did?
When we were in our contract class, because
I didn't ever cut you off. Did I?
Because I was I try to make sure I look for other people who have questions if I've asked a couple already, right. But I missed one, I think. Anyway, water under the bridge. but yeah, I still can't do it. Like, I write down the most important things.
Yeah.
But I usually ask a friend for their notes, or I'll add to an outline if I get one from a previous year or something.
Good.
Because then I'm sitting there learning stuff for the first time that I didn't learn from you.
That's right.
Because I'm not listening, right?
Yeah.
And I just can't either do one or the other. I can't write everything you say down
Nobody
and
can.
process it.
It can't be done, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it is so important. I need to tell my first year students this year as well. Just if you're spending all your time writing, trying to get every word down, that's a waste of your time.
Yeah.
You're not. What I'm saying, if I'm adding any value to your legal education, and I hope I am, then what I'm saying is kind of, at least to some extent, challenging.
Yeah.
It requires thought. Otherwise, why am I here?
Yeah.
So don't just write down. Be here, be present, listen, think, and then take down the big points, if you will. Maybe flesh it out or fill out the details later with somebody else's notes, or go home that evening while it's still relatively fresh and fill in the gaps as best you can. And it's hard advice because we're so kind of hardwired to just write. Yeah. If somebody's saying something, I don't want to miss anything.
Well, it's also, this is my personal opinion, but it really is, you're testing thoughts and ideas. You're not testing pure content. You're not asking people to regurgitate exactly what happened. And I don't think a lot of 1Ls will understand that until after the midterm.
We spoke about it a bit on the first podcast too, but it's profs, especially in law school, aren't really out to get you. Like, it is meat and potatoes that you're being tested on. Yeah. You know, it's not the obscure one case that they told you to read on your own, you know, like it's not really gotcha testing, I don't think, at all.
Yeah.
Part of, for me, what made your class so engaging was that you would bring in anecdotes sort of from your personal life. And I think everyone can relate to this, but there's a time in everyone's life growing up, they're walking through a grocery store or something like that, and they come across their teacher, and it's like they're seeing an alien, because at that age you have sort of the understanding that they live at a desk. So
definitely.
So I like that you sort of revealed a little bit about your personal life, and I would be remiss not to ask about some of your hobbies. And then there's also a follow-up that I'd like to get the end of the story to, where you got a car for...
How much can I bench?
Well, I'd like to know the answer to that too, if you want to say it off
3
camera.
questions now.
Tell us a little bit about sort of personal interests, life outside of school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before I do that, and because I'm going to forget, Muk, your comment a moment ago about, in our discussion about taking notes and being there present, reminds me of something that is quite specific to you, which is, and you're not the only person this is happening with, but when I'm looking out at a sea of faces, first of all, I have trouble distinguishing among faces, but I can, what I do perceive very clearly is somebody who's listening carefully. So it's very hard to know if somebody who's typing is listening carefully. Yeah. But there are people, and your face, when you are interested in something and listening, it's just, your face just screams it out. So it was just so delightful throughout that year to always, I could look out and there Muk he's listening and he's getting it. I can see, and he seems, you see, like you're wide-eyed, and I can't tell you how much of a difference that makes, because we're not automatons up there, we're humans, and if it looks like people are bored, like if you're bored in the classroom, I know that you're bored, and it drains the energy away from me. Yeah. Whereas the opposite is also true. If you're engaged and you seem engaged, and it doesn't mean putting up your hand all the time even. Mm-hmm. You're adding energy to me and to the class. It is a virtuous circle there.
Thank you. Yeah.
And so I've taken this way off the path. You initially asked me about my interests outside of the desk. Yeah. Away from the desk. I guess the first thing I'd say is that a lot of my life is at a desk.
Okay.
Even if the desk is my patio in the summertime, that's where I do a lot of my work. Yeah. Is sitting at home. We live on the lake. And so, it's just, I get paid to sit down with my computer, my dog's at my side, and the lake in front of me, and I can sit there and write a paper or do some research or prepare for class. And so a lot of my life, I love what I do. And so I spend a lot of time doing it. Just ask my partner, Kim. We'll eat dinner, and then we'll watch a show maybe, and then I'll go back to work. And by go back to work, I just mean, sit on the lounge chair and pull up my computer and dig into a case or prep for class tomorrow or whatever. And in many ways, I'm no more at home than when I'm doing that. I love it.
Yeah.
I've been called by more than one person a workaholic, and maybe that's true. But if workaholism is that, I'll take it. I don't feel like it's interfering with my life in any detrimental way. So I'm good with it.
You mentioned in class, one of my favorite stories that you said was the surprise car that you got for your partner Kim.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
So I know the lead up to it. You're basically hiding the fact that you got her this surprise car, I think, for her birthday.
Yep.
How does the story end? It hadn't, when you told us about it in class, it hadn't ended yet. You were just hiding this car still.
So, I was hiding the car. Yeah, I bought the car. I'd always wanted to buy somebody a car, and who better to buy a car for than your partner? So I bought her this car, and I bought it from Ottawa, and it needed to be delivered. I needed to take delivery before her birthday. It was like a week in advance. In fact, her birthday's coming up. So it's a year anniversary on this thing. So I needed to hide it. And so I got a neighbor 6 or 7 doors down to allow me to park it in her driveway. and then the day of her birthday, I pulled the car into the driveway, put one of those big bows on the front, and then she pulled into the driveway, but it didn't quite go as planned. It wasn't a movie scene.
Yeah.
Because she pulls in her old beat up car. And she's on the phone, first of all.
Oh,
so she's not
off the cuff, not a movie scene.
and it gets worse, Muk, because she's on the phone with her ex-husband.
Okay.
So she's on the phone with her ex-husband.
Makes you look pretty good, though. You'll never believe what just happened.
Yeah, I don't remember this happening with you, John. So I think it was a somewhat awkward moment. She saw the bow, and honestly, this is Kim for you. She didn't ever expect to be given a car. So her first thought, after she managed to extricate herself from her ex-husband for the phone call, first thought she told me afterwards was, he knew I needed a car, so he's gone out and got me a car, but I'm going to have to pay for it. And how am I going to afford it? So she saw the car and thought, how am I going to afford this? So it was not at all like,
it was
pure for joy.
Pure panic.
It was kind of panic, yeah.
Hey, but no entitlement there, right?
Right.
That's a good thing.
Exactly. The exact opposite of entitlement is Kim. So, but eventually it sunk in, and it was all very nice. But
you know what? But that's real life, and it's genuine.
Exactly.
And that's better than a movie in that way.
It was great. I'm very glad I did it. I also don't want to, I said I'm a workaholic, and it's not that I spend all my time at work. So I have hobbies. I wish I had a better hobby. In fact, we had a dinner party the other day, and I was asking the folks at the dinner party, my friends, whether they had hobbies and whether they could give me one. Can you give me a hobby? I need a hobby. So I've had hobbies over the years. The one that stuck the longest is flying things, remote controlled flying.
Oh, I did that.
Cool.
Did you? Like RC planes?
Yeah.
So what did you used to fly?
So I flew, well, I still do it.
Okay.
The RC planes, the full ones.
Yeah.
I did that for a couple of years. I must have lost a dozen planes in woods and stuff.
I used to have an E-Flight one, if that
the E-Flight. Those are the beginner ones. I can't tell you the number of times I put up signs in the neighborhood saying, lost. Midlife crisis. I've lost my plane. You could call this number.
That's awesome.
So I did that, and then I got into drones as well. So I've been through 2 or 3 different drones. I've got one now that is just under the 250. It's like one of the DJI ones. It's 249 grams or something.
Yeah.
It's super powerful for the size. But the problem, and I fly it, but we live on the lake, so it's a perfect place to fly. I chase sailboats and stuff around.
Yeah.
It's just so much fun.
Yeah.
But we've got 3 dogs, and one of them in particular just cannot stand the sound of the blades.
Yeah.
And so she goes berserk, and it's a completely unrelaxing experience to fly the thing as a result.
Yeah.
So it's mainly sits on our dining room table now. But so I do some of that. I do. I fly drones. What else do I do? I go to the gym sometimes, not nearly as long or as frequently as I used to.
Okay. Was bodybuilding ever a part of?
No, it was not, I never bodybuilt, so to
Okay.
speak. I did work out and I enjoyed lifting heavier weights and stuff, but I didn't
Yeah.
think of myself as a bodybuilder. So I still do that.
The other thing you mentioned in class, do you still go in the water every day?
I do.
Okay.
Every day.
Yeah. Every day. So
I didn't catch that part. Yeah.
Yeah. So we moved into this house on the lake in July of 2020.
Okay.
And I started going swimming every day, and then I just kept going. And then it went from September to October to November, and I was still going in.
Wow.
And so yeah, I swim right through the winter.
Does it freeze over?
It did two winters ago. It didn't fully freeze over last winter, except for maybe 2 days. And then I have a big sledgehammer. And I bring it out. I'll show you a picture after.
Oh, wow.
So I've got a little swimming hole that I create, and it's not really swimming in the middle of winter. It's just jumping in
and then jumping out.
Like 5 or 7 minutes.
Oh, wow.
That's how you kind of get the
Cheaper than an ice bath.
Yeah, no kidding.
Wow.
Yeah. It's honestly, it's the best thing I've ever done physically. Have
you noticed it make a big difference? I mean, it seems like going in an ice tub has become a relatively popular thing now.
Yeah.
Do you notice like the beneficial effects people talk about, how it affects mood, alertness?
Like a day without a jump in the lake in the winter is completely different. I mean, I don't really have them anymore. I always jump in, but it's such a boost of endorphins.
Yeah.
And it's not ephemeral. It doesn't just dissipate in 15 minutes. It's with you for the day, this good feeling. And it's a combination of things. Part of it is just chemical, but also I think part of it is almost intellectual.
Yeah.
Like there's this challenge.
Yeah.
There's this
even the discipline behind it.
There's something like that. Yeah. There's a commitment. I've kind of committed to myself to do this. And the water is 2 degrees or 3 degrees. And I did it. I defeated that. I met nature.
Does your family think you're nuts, or do they ever try?
No, nobody tries it. My mom thinks I'm crazy. I remember once going out. We have neighbors on the lake, and I didn't announce to anybody that I was going to be doing this. So I was out one day walking the dog. It was like January or something, and I met one of the neighbors who I don't really speak with that much.
Yeah.
And she said that the word amongst the neighbors was that I'd lost a bet.
Oh.
Nobody could figure out
every day for the rest of your life.
Nobody could figure out why I would do this unless I'd lost a bet. But it's very addictive.
Yeah.
So I miss the winters when I'm I love summer and I love warm weather, but I do miss the cold swims. And so it's nice. It's starting to get cold out there now. It's so good. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's fun.
So how did you end up switching to torts for a while and then now back switching to land transactions, contracts, and remedies?
So it's really a function of what the law school needs at any given time. So they were short a torts teacher one year, and that was probably 7 or 8 years ago that I was first asked to teach it. I mean, it's almost never the case that you're told to teach something. Okay. But the dean or the associate dean in charge of the curriculum will ask you if you want to teach. We have a need in torts. It would really help us if you could teach. Yeah. So once again, I went up to a cottage and tried to remember my torts class from way back when, and what torts was all about, and learned it, and started teaching it. I think I taught it 4 or 5 years, and I would teach it again next year if asked. It was a terrific course to teach. I don't love it as much as contracts, but and land transactions is similar. My colleague, when he was associate dean, Eric Knutson, who I think he probably teaches you insurance, terrific fellow.
I love him. He's such
fabulous
a great
teacher. Yeah. I've never had him for a class, obviously, but I can't imagine he's anything less than an absolutely stellar teacher, because he's such a terrific human being. Who cares so much about his students. I mean, he just cares so much about his students. So Eric was associate dean at the time, and the sessional, I think, who had been teaching land transactions for whatever reason, either wasn't going to teach it again or wasn't being asked to teach it again. And so he thought, well, and this is Eric, Michael teaches contracts and got an interest in private law. And so maybe he'd want to take this on. And it didn't take me very long to decide. I just thought, yeah, I'll give it a go. And
it's right up your alley.
And it was just like a perfect fit. I'm so glad I started teaching it. And then they say if you want to learn something well, teach it.
Yeah.
There's no better way to learn something than to teach it, because you've got to know it so well.
Yeah.
Because you're only going to sort of teach a little bit of it, but you have to know all the everything outside of the window that you're teaching. And I ended up learning it and then writing a book on it over the last few years. I just got published this past February on,
congratulations.
Thank you, on agreements of purchase and sale. It's called Termination and Rescission of Agreements and Purchase and Sale. It's available at any bookstore that, you care to look at. Amazon as well.
That's terrific.
So
I might need that in practice.
Well, you might need it in land transactions. Anyway, so I can't even remember why did we start down that road?
Because you were analogizing how you were asked to teach torts and how you were asked to teach land transactions.
Yeah. So what I teach in any given year is a function and part of what I know about and what the law school needs.
Yeah.
So there's always a danger that somebody's going to ask me to teach property law at some point, because we're always sort of
got to stay sharp.
Law. Yeah. But I, in a way, I really love the challenge. If I've got the time and there's not too much on my plate in terms of administrative duties and commitments to scholarship and writing, to be asked to teach a brand new course is kind of energizing. Right.
Yes.
It's really fun to be able to dig into a new topic or something that you're only vaguely familiar with and learn it backwards and forwards and then teach it. It's fun, really.
Do you get a head start in terms of like asking for materials from people who've taught a course before to get an
Yeah, you definitely can. And all our colleagues are really good about sharing syllabi and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's awesome.
This is putting you on the spot a little bit. This is the last question that I really have. If you had a piece of advice for people in our situation, irrespective of what they're pursuing, but just being in law school, what would it be? Or you could orient it more towards people pursuing academia again.
So advice for...
what would you tell yourself going back to your time in law school about the pursuit of success in general?
So let me start specific with kind of nuts and bolts stuff. I would say that it's folly to think you know what you're interested in terms of legal disciplines. So I would encourage you to take a course in a subject that holds no obvious appeal to you, except perhaps maybe the prof is good, or you've had the person before, or they have a good reputation. Take a course, even if it's no interest in insolvency and bankruptcy law, but I'll take a course in it anyway. Because you may find that it's exactly it's an exact fit for you. So,
that's actually great advice. It's particularly relevant for everyone doing the recruit right now. I feel like a lot of people are enamored by the prospect of making a lot of money, but don't even know if they want to practice corporate or business law. So that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah. Yeah, take courses in areas you're not interested in. And then on the flip side of the coin, I think too few students take advantage of the opportunity to do an ISP, an independent study project, which is a course, and you can do it for, I can't remember exactly, but it's 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 credits. You can do big ones too, where you find a prof who is willing to supervise the project. And you've got an interest. Maybe you took tort law in first year, and you had an interest in a particular case or a particular doctrine, and you wanted to follow it up. But there's no advanced courses in it, so I know what I'll do. I'll do a research project on it, and I'll write a long paper for a prof and do it for credit. And that's a great opportunity.
That's really cool.
I had no idea.
I hadn't heard of that either.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Okay.
That's terrific.
Yeah. So, I'm not sure if I have any good life advice other than you know, if you, money cannot be your driver. Money may well come, but if that's your driver, I think it's going to be an unhappy sort of life.
Yeah.
And in law in particular, I think you have to like what you're doing and what you're studying and who you're helping and what, you know, the area of law you've chosen aligns with your values.
This is very enlightening for me.
Yeah.
You've been a great guest and such a good sport. So thank you so much for coming onto our podcast. And I hope that the audience has a better appreciation for what it's like from your perspective to be a prof.
Well, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you both very much for inviting me. It's an honor to be your first.
It's our honor to have you as our first guest.
Yeah,
guys.
So thanks for listening, everybody, and stay tuned for the next one.
Ciao for now.
Ciao.